Listen to me very carefully, because what just happened in Dotto County, Mississippi, is not a local election story. It is not a redistricting footnote, and it is absolutely not something that only matters to political analysts and party strategists inside the Washington bubble. In deep red Mississippi, a state Donald Trump and his MAGA coalition have treated as their permanent, unassailable, unconditional property. A black woman just walked into a brand new majority black Senate district, stood in front of voters and crushed the Republican candidate by 26 points, 63% to 37%. In Mississippi, the same state where Republicans have held a legislative supermajority for 13 consecutive years, the same state where Trump's political operation has operated with the confidence of a landlord who has never once worried about being evicted. I am Miesels. And what just happened in Dotto County is not an isolated surprise. It is the opening scene of a political realignment that is going to reshape the next decade of American power and your financial future along with it. This channel is where we connect the political dots that every other outlet either misses or deliberately avoids, because the intersection of political power and economic consequence is where ordinary people get hurt and where informed people get ahead. The intelligence I am about to deliver in this video is the kind of analytical depth that political consultants charge thousands of dollars per hour to provide, and I am giving it to you completely free. The only price is a subscription and your commitment to see the full picture clearly. Hit that subscribe button right now, because the next political earthquake is already building, and the people who understand it before it lands are always the ones who navigate it without getting buried. To understand why last night's result in Dotto County, Mississippi sent shockwaves through every Republican state house operation in the South, you need to understand the specific history that produced this election and why its significance extends far beyond one county and one state. On election night in Dotto County, Democrat Terresa Gillespie Isom did not merely win a state Senate seat. She made documented, verifiable, irreversible history. She became the first African-American senator and the first female senator in Dotto County's recorded political history, in a county, in a state, in a region where that kind of history has been systematically prevented for generations, not by democratic competition, but by structural map drawing designed explicitly to dilute the voting power of black communities. The special election itself existed because a federal court ordered it to exist. United States District Judge Sharon Aycock ruled that Mississippi's previous legislative district maps violated the Voting Rights Act by deliberately diluting black voting strength, concentrating black voters in ways that minimized their ability to elect representatives of their choice. The court ordered new maps. The new maps created a majority black Senate district in Dotto County for the first time, and the first time those voters had a district that actually reflected their community. The first time they had a real, fair, genuine choice. They delivered a result that the Republican Party of Mississippi called disappointing but not unexpected, which is political party language for they saw it coming and had no answer for it. Isom's 63% was not a narrow win built on turnout quirks or low information voters. It was a decisive, documented 26-point mandate from a community that had been waiting for a fair map for decades. The numbers do not lie. They never have. They never will. And the number 26 tells you everything you need to know about what happens when structural barriers to democratic participation are removed and voters are given an honest, competitive choice. Now, let me give you the full political consequence of what happened in Mississippi last night, because the single seat Isom won is only the beginning of the story, and the Republican Party's response reveals exactly how much damage was actually done. Mississippi Senate Democrats did not win one seat last night. They won 2 seats. Isom's 26-point blowout in Dotto County and Johnny Bree's 71% landslide in District 45, with Senator Reginald Jackson simultaneously re-elected in District 11 with 67% of the vote. 2 new seats plus 1 retained seat in a single election night. And here is why those two new seats constitute a genuine structural earthquake for Republican legislative strategy in Mississippi, not just a symbolic win for Democrats. Before last night, Republicans held a supermajority in the Mississippi State Senate, 36 seats out of 52, comfortably above the two-thirds threshold that allowed them to pass major legislation unilaterally, without a single Democratic vote, without bipartisan negotiation, without compromise of any kind. For 13 consecutive years, Republicans in Mississippi Senate could and did pass whatever they wanted whenever they wanted with complete disregard for the minority, school choice legislation, budget decisions, regulatory frameworks, voting rules, all of it decided exclusively by one party with no structural check on its power. After last night, Republicans hold 34 seats, one seat below the supermajority threshold. They no longer have the unilateral power to pass major legislation. For the first time in 13 years, any significant bill in the Mississippi State Senate requires Democratic votes to become law. The Mississippi Republican Party Chairman Mike Hurst attempted to frame this as scoring points in the fourth quarter while losing the game in a blowout. I want you to understand what that statement reveals about the Republican Party's relationship with political reality right now, because a chairman who describes losing his party's supermajority after 13 years as a fourth quarter score by the losing team is a chairman who is telling you in public, on the record, that he does not understand what just happened to him. That is not spin. That is a man who walked into the results of this election and emerged genuinely unable to process their structural significance. Stop being a victim of political narratives designed to minimize results that the people delivering those narratives are privately terrified by. Now I need to explain the Supreme Court dimension of this story, because without understanding what the Roberts Court did to the Voting Rights Act and why the Mississippi result is a direct, documented, real-world consequence of that decision, you cannot understand why this election is the beginning of a much larger political problem for Trump Republicans rather than an isolated anomaly. Here is the context that matters. In 1970, states like Louisiana, Georgia, and Mississippi had 0 black members of Congress, not because those states lacked black voters. They had substantial black populations, but because the systems of district mapping were designed explicitly and effectively to keep black political representation at 0. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 and its 1982 amendments, which introduced what is called the effects test, changed that. So courts could strike down voting practices that produced discriminatory results even without proving explicit racist intent in the minds of the mapmakers. For decades, that legal tool produced real, measurable progress in minority representation across the South and beyond. And then the Supreme Court, rebuilt with 3 Trump-appointed justices joining Chief Justice John Roberts, who as a young Reagan-era lawyer had explicitly called the effects test a radical experiment in electoral engineering, systematically dismantled the meaningful enforcement mechanisms of the Voting Rights Act. The Roberts Court did not announce they were abolishing the law. They are too strategically sophisticated for that kind of direct action. They simply made it progressively more difficult to prove discrimination unless you could demonstrate explicit racist intent, a standard that effectively ends meaningful enforcement because documented racist intent is vanishingly rare in the era of lawyers and focus groups. The result in Mississippi was a federal court finding that the previous maps violated what remained of the Voting Rights Act, ordering new maps. And those new maps producing a 26-point Democratic blowout in the very first election they were used in. Trump and his allies spent years arguing that weakening voting protections was about election integrity and constitutional principle. The first real-world result of that weakening was a brand-new majority black district that delivered the most decisive Democratic victory Mississippi has seen in a generation. The irony writes itself. And here is the dimension of this, that Trump's political operation is not publicly discussing, but is absolutely calculating privately those same Voting Rights Act protections that Republicans successfully weakened in red states also constrained Democratic mapmakers in blue states like California, New York, and Illinois, who were required to maintain majority-minority districts even when doing so cost Democrats seats. If those protections are effectively gone nationwide, blue states can draw maps that maximize Democratic advantage without the same legal constraints that previously applied. The party that spent years engineering structural political advantages through judicial appointments and legal strategy may have just handed the opposition a significantly larger toolbox by removing the rules that applied equally to both sides. Now let me take you to Ohio, because Mississippi is the headline, but Ohio is the story that should genuinely alarm everyone who believes Trump's working-class coalition is a permanent political realignment rather than a temporary transactional relationship built on promises that are not being kept. Ohio used to be the quintessential swing state, the state everyone watched on election night as the bellwether of American political sentiment. Trump converted it into what appeared to be a deep red fortress, winning 81 of 88 counties in 2024 by hammering relentlessly on trade, manufacturing, forgotten Americans, and economic patriotism. The wall looked permanent. It is not. In the Mahoning Valley, the gritty, union-heavy industrial region around Youngstown that was Democratic heartland for generations before Trump flipped larger portions of it, something is shifting that polling numbers do not fully capture yet, but that people on the ground are documenting in real time. Trump stood in front of workers at the Lordstown GM plant and told them explicitly on camera with full confidence, "Do not sell your homes, the jobs are coming back." GM closed the plant anyway. Foxconn arrived with massive promises of a manufacturing renaissance on the same site that Trump called a huge win for American workers. Today, that facility operates far below capacity, is not unionized, and the manufacturing renaissance it was supposed to represent exists primarily as a campaign talking point rather than as a functioning economic reality. Manufacturing employment nationwide is down approximately 80,000 jobs since Trump began his second term. Auto manufacturing alone has lost around 25,000 jobs. The kitchen table economics that Trump promised to fix are not being fixed, and the people who believe those promises most completely are beginning to notice. Drive through Mahoning County today and you will see significantly fewer MAGA flags and Trump signs than 2 years ago. Veterans like Mark Scone, who served in Kosovo, Iraq, and Afghanistan and went fully into the MAGA movement during Trump's first term, now describe themselves as independents supporting Democrats in 2026, not because they suddenly embraced progressive policy positions, but because they believe the MAGA movement poses a genuine threat to the constitutional norms they served to defend. Veterans like Del King, an Iraq War veteran who owns a gym in Portsmouth, are being pushed away by what they describe as the casual, almost entertained way the Trump administration discusses the potential for new military engagements. Men who actually served, who actually sent friends home in flag-draped coffins, do not experience talk of new wars as a rally soundbite. They experience it as a personal provocation. And across more than half of Ohio's counties, the cost of living is rising faster than wages, energy, housing, and groceries, all outpacing take-home pay in the exact communities Trump claimed to champion. That is not a partisan talking point. That is kitchen table pain being absorbed by working-class voters who were explicitly promised their economic lives would improve. The Mississippi election result and the Ohio coalition erosion are not separate stories. They are two symptoms of the same underlying condition, a political coalition held together by promises that are not being fulfilled, facing demographic and judicial headwinds that are stronger than the party's strategic architects anticipated. Now let me bring this directly to what it means for you, because political analysis without financial and practical consequence is just commentary, and I refuse to deliver commentary when I can deliver intelligence. The intersection of political power and economic policy is where your financial life actually gets determined, and the shifts I am describing in Mississippi and Ohio have direct, measurable consequences for every American, regardless of party affiliation. When a political party loses its supermajority in a state legislature, the policy output of that legislature changes. Legislation that previously passed unilaterally now requires negotiation and compromise. Budgets that previously reflected one party's priorities exclusively now must account for competing perspectives. Regulatory environments that were moving consistently in one direction now face genuine legislative friction. For businesses operating in Mississippi, for investors with exposure to Mississippi-dependent industries, for anyone calculating the regulatory trajectory of a state that just shifted from unilateral Republican control to a negotiated legislative environment, that change has real financial implications that need to be priced into planning at the national level. The coalition erosion I described in Ohio is a leading indicator of what the 2026 midterm map may look like, and midterm election results directly shape the legislative environment that determines tax policy, regulatory frameworks, trade policy, and fiscal spending for the following 2 years. The working-class voters who are quietly taking down MAGA flags in Mahoning County are the same voters whose defection from the Republican coalition in sufficient numbers could flip House seats, reshape Senate dynamics, and fundamentally alter the policy direction that determines interest rates, tariff structures, and federal spending priorities that affect every investment you own. You are broke, and you do not even know it. If you are treating political developments as sports entertainment rather than as economic intelligence with direct financial implications, the people who understood in 2010 that the Tea Party wave was going to reshape the regulatory environment position themselves ahead of it. The people who understood in 2018 that the suburban revolt against Trump was going to flip the House position themselves ahead of it. The people who understand now that a Mississippi 26-point blowout and an Ohio coalition quietly eroding are early indicators of a significant political realignment in 2026 will position themselves ahead of what that realignment produces in tax and regulatory policy. Stop being a victim of political developments you refuse to analyze economically. The numbers do not lie. A 13-year supermajority broken by 26 points in the first election after fair maps were drawn is not a data point you dismiss. It is a signal you read carefully and act on intelligently. Let me close with the full picture assembled because I want you to leave this video with the complete strategic understanding of what last night in Dotto County, Mississippi actually means. A brand new majority black Senate district created by federal court order after decades of maps deliberately designed to dilute black voting power produced a 26-point Democratic blowout in the first election it was ever used in. A 13-year Republican supermajority in the Mississippi State Senate is broken. Veterans in Ohio are quietly walking away from a coalition they joined based on promises that manufacturing jobs would return, promises that are not being kept. The working-class economic pain that Trump rode to power is intensifying rather than resolving in the exact communities that were supposed to benefit most from his economic promises. And a Supreme Court whose voting rights decisions Republicans celebrated as strategic victories may have inadvertently handed blue state Democrats a larger map-making toolbox than they previously possessed. So I'm asking you directly right now, are you going to be a winner who reads these political signals accurately, understands what they mean for the 2026 legislative landscape and the economic policy that landscape will produce, and positions your financial decisions accordingly? Or are you going to be a loser who treats Mississippi as a local curiosity, dismisses Ohio's coalition erosion as anecdotal, and wakes up after the 2026 midterms wondering why the political and economic environment shifted in ways nobody warned them about? You are being warned right now. The numbers do not lie. 26 points in Mississippi is not noise, it is signal. Subscribe, share this, drop your assessment in the comments. The story is not over, not even close.